The Razr and the Z Flip are the two main options for clamshell foldables in the US, but they are also two of the best options that are available overall. Last year, the Razr Plus had too many weaknesses for me to consider it the better of the two, but Motorola has made a lot of changes, and I think that this year's competition is going to be a lot closer between the Z Flip series and the Razr Plus. Let's compare both phones and see which one comes out on top. Of course, I will give my opinion, but at the end, everyone has their own preferences. I am interested in what you think about the phones, so let me know in the comments which one you prefer and why. But before we get started, just a reminder that liking and subscribing will really help this channel out. Now let's begin. The first thing I want to compare is the cover screen. And in this one, the Razr Plus of 2024 has the Samsung Z Flip 6 beat in pretty much every aspect. Starting with the screen size, the Razr Plus measures at 4 inches, while the Z Flip 6 is at 3.4 inches. Now that's not 100% gonna be the actual numbers because you kind of have to subtract the camera section of the Razr Plus. But just generally, the Razr Plus is taking advantage of the space for the cover screen more than the Z Flip 6. And on top of that, the Razr Plus has a way higher pixel density. The Razr Plus has over 415 pixels per inch, and the Z Flip 6 has just a little over 300 pixels per inch. And that's a pretty big difference in terms of clarity. The Razr also has a higher peak brightness rating of 2400 nits, while the Z Flip 6 has 1600 nits. Now, I don't take that number too seriously, especially on the Samsung part, because Samsung is always kicking higher than what the nits rating says compared to the competition. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Z Flip 6 is as bright as a Razr Plus, even though the nit rating is not as high. But in terms of the specs on paper, the Razr Plus is still the higher one. And continuing on with that trend, the Razr Plus has 165 Hz of refresh rate versus the Z Flip 6's 60 Hz. So the 60 Hz is likely going to be just fine for the cover screen, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the Razr Plus has a higher refresh rate and just keeping everything consistent between the main screen and the cover screen. Moving on to the cameras, Motorola went a different route than what's usually found on phones, and they swapped out the ultra wide with a 2x lens. It's a bit of a controversial move, but I generally prefer the 2x over the ultra wide in most cases. Because of this change, you might miss out on some ultra wide shots or fitting some things in properly when there isn't enough space to move back. But when you look at it, you're swapping out a sensor that was covering from 0.5 to 1, and now you're able to cover from 2 to 4 with just a 2x crop. So this setup is basically going to give a much larger usable range than the traditional setup would. And contrary to that, the Z Flip 6 stayed with an ultra-wide and main sensor setup. But comparing the main sensor sizes, the Z Flip 6 is still the larger of the two sensors. The Razr has a 1/1.95 sensor as a main sensor, and the Z Flip 6 has a 1/1.56 sensor. And that's quite a bit of a size difference. So in low light and nighttime photos, the larger sensor is going to have a clearer picture and much less noise than the smaller sensors. When it comes to the improvement of the quality of the photos, the Z Flip 6 did improve a bit and is especially noticeable in nighttime photos and when you start cropping in a lot. But I feel like the Razr Plus had a much larger improvement. So I guess I would call it the most improved camera setup. But it really depends on what kind of optimization you like. I know that when I'm comparing both phones, the Razr has a more natural look to the photos. There's a lot less optimization. And the Z Flip 6 has a lot of optimization, which kind of keeps it as steady as you can be with a phone camera. There are downsides to both. For example, when you crop in a lot with the Razr Plus, you don't get that optimization where you can read the letters more easily on something you're taking a picture of that's really far. It's just gonna be degraded naturally. As with the Z Flip 6, you'll be able to see the letters more clearly, but it starts getting that water painting type of look, so you give and take a little bit on either one. Of course, with the Razr Plus's setup, you're gonna have a longer range now with that 2x telephoto lens compared to the Z Flip 6 having an ultra wide and main sensor. So I guess depending on what kind of photos you like to take, you might be better off with one or the other. The last thing I want to say about the camera is that the Razr Plus now takes photos that are actually good enough to get along with. I didn't think that the last year's model was good enough, and that was a big downside to me, but this time it's at that point where I could live with it. So that's something to think about if you're on the fence. And the next thing I'm gonna look at is the backplate. So Motorola went all in with the leather this time. Last year they had one model with the leather and then eventually came out with another one. But this year, everything I saw on the website was with the leather back. So it seems like that was very successful and people loved it. One thing they did change was that they added a stripe in the center and it kind of adds a little bit of more character to it. So it's not as plain as before. With the Z Flip 6, it's the same backplate basically. If it's not 100% the same, then it's 99% the same. The only difference I noticed this time is that they had the crafted back, which is like a carbon fiber looking and feeling backplate, and it was actually pretty cool. But besides that, it's basically the same and just a glass backplate. Not like glass is bad, it's just not new anymore and it's kind of slippery, especially when you compare it to the leather counterpart. Now, unfolding the phones to the main screen, they both have a comparable experience. The Z Flip 6 has reduced the crease to the point where it's very similar to the Razr Pluses. It might not be 100% there, but it's so close that it really doesn't matter anymore. It's negligible at this point. In terms of the color and clarity of the picture, it's great on both phones. A lot of people like Samsung's better with their color science and everything, but if you don't like that, maybe Motorola would be a good option for you. The main thing that I've noticed though is that Motorola is a lot of times too dark for the environment and I have to raise it a little bit manually. While Samsung always seems to be just about perfect in terms of how bright it is compared to my surroundings. The other difference is going to be that the refresh rate is going to be a little bit higher on the Razr Plus, but the Z Flip 6 is at 120 Hz and I don't know how much of a difference it will visually make to the average user. I know for myself, I don't really notice that difference. They're both smooth and they both have a great experience. All right, so now we're moving on to the speakers. Now I know that the clamshell foldables are not gonna have the best speakers, so I'm not surprised that neither of them are gonna be on my list of best speakers. The main difference that I notice is that the Razr Plus has a bit of a deeper sound, so if you like that, that might be better for you. And the Z Flip 6 has more of a higher treble than the Razr Plus does. However, what I don't find too surprising is that both phones kind of struggled when you max out the volume. They both have like a muffling effect when you get to the highest levels. So with either phone, you're gonna wanna keep it below that maybe 75% mark or something around there. So now I wanna move on to the software, but I'm gonna separate it into the cover screen software and the main screen software. So starting with the cover screen software, obviously Motorola has the edge on that one. Motorola is leading the charge and has the best cover screen software from any clamshell out there. The main difference in usability is that Motorola basically has a fully functional phone on the cover screen. There are two major things that I think make Motorola the leader by far, that if Samsung were to fix, it would at least be a lot closer in terms of which software is better. The first thing being that with the Z Flip 6, you can't interact with all of the notifications that you get. Some of them are only there to let you know what the notification is, but all you can really do is swipe it away. With Motorola, so far, I've been able to interact with every single notification that I get. I can even respond to two-factor authentication on the cover screen where I haven't been able to with the Z Flip 6. The second thing is that with the Razr, you can continue with the app whether you're going from open to close position or from the close to the open. With the Z Flip 6, you can only continue the app when you go from the close to open position. As soon as you close the phone, it stops right there. And I haven't been able to find a setting where it lets me do that. So as far as I know, you just can't continue an app when you go from the open to close position. Now, when it comes to the software with the main screen, it's definitely a different story. There's no huge lead from Motorola. They're both really good. And they both give you a lot of options to customize your phone. Of course, Samsung has their whole Good Lock suite, which lets you go above and beyond just normal customization if you wanted to. Either way, Motorola still gives you a good amount of options. Motorola's is good, it's very similar to just a stock Android, so you can't really go wrong with that. It's clean and efficient. The main thing that I think is going to be the biggest differentiator between the two phones is their software support. So with Motorola, you're not getting anywhere near the same software support as you would with Samsung. I did read that they're gonna start implementing more timely updates. For now, from what I've seen, Motorola's just nowhere near as consistent as Samsung is. And the biggest thing that bothered me from Motorola is that they took so long to roll out Android 14 on their previous year's Razr Plus. It's still, you waited a long time compared to all the other manufacturers. And with the Z Flip 6, Samsung is now offering 7 years of OS and security patches. So you're gonna have a lot more support for a longer period of time from Samsung than with Motorola. And that could be a huge one for some. Now let's move on to the internals, where we'll find even more differences between the two phones. The first difference I'm gonna point out is that the Z Flip 6 has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, while the Motorola Razr Plus has the Snapdragon 8S Gen 3. There's gonna be some difference in power there for sure, but I don't know if there's gonna be any difference in terms of efficiency. I would think not. I think it'll be about the same, if not the 8S Gen 3 might be a little bit better from what I would expect, but we'll see that when I get to test them out on my full day challenge. But this year, the Z Flip 6 upgraded their RAM to 12 gigabytes, and now they both have 12 gigabytes of RAM, which for a clamshell, it seems like it's a really good amount. That's also gonna help them future-proof the phones, because with all these new features that are coming out that are software-based, it's gonna require more RAM. So they'll be able to handle the new stuff as they come out. And of course, we have to look at the battery, because now they're at a pretty decent point for both phones. They're both now at 4,000 milliamp hours, which I think puts them at the smaller slab phone type territory. And for the Z Flip 6, that matches the S24 base model. With the Motorola Razr Plus, I'm not sure if they have one that's exactly 4,000, but either way, it's the largest one they've had up to this point. The main difference is gonna be charging speeds. With the Z Flip 6, we're still at 25 watts, which I'm tired of seeing already. At this point, we should be at 45 watts for all these phones. Either way, we're stuck at 25 watts with Samsung, and Motorola brought it up to 45 watts. So kudos to them. And in terms of wireless charging, Motorola boosted their wireless charging to match the Z Flip 6 at 15 watts. So the Z Flip 6 no longer has an edge there. And finally, we're gonna look at the storage. For some reason, Motorola only sells the 256 gigabyte version here in the US. So that's very limited. At least it's not 128, so it's doable at 256. And with the Z Flip 6, you get the option of 256 or 512. So if you need that extra space, there's not really much of an option. The Z Flip 6 is the only one that's gonna give you the extra storage. So of course, no phone is perfect, but hopefully the information I provided will help you get an idea of which phone will work best for you. Overall, both phones compete so well against each other that you can't really go wrong with any option. With either phone, you can point out one thing that you don't like about it and then counter it with something you don't like about the other one. So they kind of trade blows at this point. One way that I'm able to kind of separate the phones is by determining what you're looking for in terms of the experience. If you want the better cover screen experience, the faster charging, and the longer camera range, you might prefer the Razr Plus this time. But if you want smoother software with more features, better software support, and additional storage, then the Z Flip 6 is going to be the one that's going to be better for you. I'm actually still having a tough time deciding which one I would prefer. In my situation, since I don't need to keep a phone longer than 3 years, I will probably go with the Razr Plus this time. But if anyone's gonna keep their phone longer than that, that software support might come in real handy in the future, so Samsung might be the better option. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Which one would you choose and why? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.